Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Kof Tet. The Mishnah teaches Echad Kodashim Kesherin, Ve'echad Kodashim Pesulin, Shaya Pesulan Bakodesh, Ve'krivan Bahutz Hayab. The following are categories of types of sacrifices that, if you burn it outside of the courtyard, you would be liable to karet. Whether it is a Kodashim, a sacrifice that's valid, you slaughtered it in a valid way inside the courtyard, did everything right, and then you took it outside and burned it, you're liable. Or if it's a kodashim that's invalid, but it's something that happened ba kodesh, meaning in the sanctuary or in the course of the normal process, it became invalid in some way. This would mean that it's invalid, but only a little bit invalid, such that b'di'avad, if you put it on the mizbeach, you would leave it there. If it's that kind of type of something that's invalid, that's not so bad, and you took it and burned it outside, you would be liable. However, if it was a type of psul that would make it so bad that even if you put it on the mizbeach b'di'avad, you would have to take it off, that kind of thing, because it's totally invalid to be a proper korban. Therefore, if you burn it outside of the courtyard, you would not be liable. Korban olah has two parts. They all gets burnt on the mizbeach, but the parts are the flesh and the sacrificial parts, the emurin, like the fat and kidneys, that for all korbanot that goes on the mizbeach. So to the olah, although it all gets burnt, but still it's two separate categories of the emurin and the rest of the flesh. If someone, in order to be liable to of karet, you have to put at least a kezayit and burn it outside. This is following the opinion that you don't need the whole animal or not even the whole limb. Another opinion that says even just a kezayit, and that kezayit, in the case of a korban olah, can be made up of half flesh and half emurin. We'll see how that applies to other types of korbanot. Tenor banan asher yale olah o zabach en li ela olah minayin rabot emurei asham ve'emurei chatat ve'emurei kodashim ve'emurei kodashim kalim Talmud omar zabach. We have a long braita that's going from which we're going to derive all types of korbanot that one is liable if one burns it outside of the courtyard. So from the pasuk, this is back in 17:8-9, it says, someone who offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice, it uses olah or zabach. So since it says olah, for sure, korban olah is included. If I burn it outside of the courtyard, I'm going to be liable. But how do you know that I should include also the sacrificial parts of an asham? Not the meat, because the meat of asham, the kohanim would eat. But if I burn the sacrificial parts of asham, or the sacrificial parts of a chatat, or the sacrificial parts of other kodashim, or the sacrificial parts of kodashim kalim, and I burn it instead of inside I burn it on a mizbeach outside, how do you know that I would be liable karet? That's why it says zabach. Zabach includes all other types of korbanot. Minayin lerabot hakometz ve'halebona ve'ketoret u'minchat kohanim u'minchat kohen mashiach ve'amenasech sheloshet lugin yain u'shloshet lugin mayim. And how do you know that I also should include in the prohibition of karet if someone burns outside of the courtyard the handful of flour from a korban mincha? That's the part that's supposed to go on the mizbeach. Instead, you burn it outside. Or the frankincense that goes along with some korban mincha and the 12 loaves, or ketoret that's supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach ketoret. Instead, I burn it outside. Or the korban mincha of kohanim, with that the whole korban mincha gets burnt, not only the kometz, but all the rest of the flour is all supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach. The point is, whatever is supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach, that you would be liable for if you burn it outside the temple courtyard. And the korban mincha of kohen mashiach, that's also entirely burnt. Or if someone pours 3 log of yayin or 3 log of mayim, which is dedicated to be a nesech that's supposed to be on the mizbeach inside. Instead, one pours it on the mizbeach outside of the courtyard. How do you know you're liable in all those cases? Talmud omar ve'petach ol moed lo yibienu. So in that same pasuk it says, and he does not bring it to the entrance of Ol Moed. So that's coming to include Kol haba lepetach Ol Moed chaybin ala bachutz, anything that you would bring to the entrance of Ol Moed in order to offer as a sacrifice on the mizbeach. If anything like that you bring instead outside on a mizbeach outside of the courtyard, one is liable to karet. Fine, now I know only if it's a valid offering, but what about if it's a valid if it's a korban that became invalid in some way, kegon halan v'hayosev hatameh v'shenishchat chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo v'shekibelu pesulin v'zarku et damo v'nitanin lemata shenetanan lema'ala v'nitanin lema'ala shenetanan lemata v'nitanin b'chutz shenetanan bifni v'nitanin bifni shenetanan b'chutz u'pesa v'chata shenetanan shelo lishman minayin. So these are all types of things that make a korban invalid. If it was left overnight, or if it left the courtyard, or if it became tameh, or if it was the shechita was done outside at the time or outside the place, or if a kohen who was pasul received the blood or sprinkled the blood. And if it's a korban that the blood should have been placed below the red line on the mizbech and you put it above, or should have been above and you put it below, or it should have been the blood should have been put only on the outside mizbech and you put it on the inside and inside the hechal, or it should have been inside and you put it outside, or if it was a korban pesach and chatat that you placed the blood having in mind that it's for the sake of a different type of korban. Those two become pesulin. So how do you know in all those cases, if I take any of these items and I burn it outside of the courtyard, also I would be liable? Talmud Omar, lo yibi'enu la'asot, kol mitkabel bepetach ol moed chayavin alav bachutz. That's from the words in that same pasuk, that anything that he does not bring to sacrifice, so that means that anything that would be acceptable in the entrance of Ol Moed, that if I would put it on the Mizbeach b'di'avad, I would leave it there. Anything like that, I am liable if I burnt it outside the courtyard. And so now I only know that if it's a totally valid korban and I burn it outside, then I'm liable to karet. But how do you know if it has some kind of psul, not the worst kind of psulim, but if it has some kind of psul that still, if I burn it outside, I would be liable? Kegon, halan, vayosev hatameh v'shenishchat chutz lizmano v'chutz limkomo v'shekibelu pesulin v'zarku et damo v'nitanin lemata shenetanan lema'ala v'nitanin lema'ala shenetanan lemata v'nitanin b'chutz shenetanan bifnim v'nitanin bifnim shenetanan b'chutz u'pesa v'chata shenetanan shelo lishman minayin. For example, if it was left overnight, or if it went outside of the courtyard, or if the meat became tameh, or if one does shechita with intention to consume it after its time, or outside its designated area, or if a kohen who's pasul received the blood or sprinkled the blood, or if it was a type of korban that the blood should be placed below the red line on the mizbech and one puts it on top, or if it should have been on top and one put it on the bottom, or if it's a type of korban that the blood should be placed only on the outside altar and you put it in the inside altar, or if it should have been sprinkled inside and then you sprinkled it outside, or if it's korban pesach or a korban chatat and you place the blood having in mind a different type of korban, right? Those two, all the way at the beginning of the Masechet, we said Pesach and Chatat, Shelo Lishman, is Pasul. Minayin, how do you know that if you burnt any of these things outside of the courtyard, one would be liable to karet? Talmud Omar, Lo yibi'enu la'asot, Kol hamit kabel bepetach ol moed, Chayvin alav bachutz, because that same pasuk in Vayikra 17 says, and he will not bring it to the entrance of Ol Moed to sacrifice it. So that means anything that will be accepted if brought petach ol moed on the mizbeach. Now all these things you're not supposed to put on the mizbeach, but all these things, if b'diavad you place it on the mizbeach, you leave it there. It's mitkabel. The mizbeach will make it kodesh. So therefore, since it has some possibility of being valid, therefore any of these things, if one offers it on outside of the courtyard, then one will be liable. On the other hand, if it's something that is pasul, so pasul that if you put it on the mizbech, you'd have to take it off, then if you burnt that outside, one would not be liable. Hamaleh kezayit min ha'olah. The Mishnah then says, if one offers in outside the courtyard and a kezayit that's made up of half the emurin of an olah and half the meat of an olah, one is still liable, because when it comes to a korban olah, it's all going to be burnt anyway on the inside mizbeach, since it's all fit to be burnt on the inside mizbeach. If you burn it outside, you would be liable. Olah ve'emureha'in shelamim ve'emurehen la. We can infer from the Mishnah that this is true only for an olah, and the flesh of the olah and the sacrificial parts of the olah, those will combine to make a isur karet. But if it's the flesh of a korban shelamim, which is eaten by people, and as half a kazait of that and half a kazait of the sacrificial parts of a shelamim, those will not join together. If you put half and half together and burnt it outside of the courtyard, one would not be liable, because the meat, that half of it that's just meat, is eaten by people. It's not supposed to be put on the korban inside, put on the altar inside, and therefore it has nothing to do. It's not considered liable by burning it outside. Tanena lahad tanur banan olav emureha mistafin lechazait lahalotan bachutz ulachayeb alehen mishum pigul notad vetameh. We have a braita that repeats and supports and elaborates on what the Mishnah said, that a korban olah, the flesh of it and its sacrificial parts, come together, half of one and half of the other, to form a kazait, that if you offered it outside of the courtyard, one would be liable to karet. And also, one would be liable for them if you ate it in terms of pigul, notad, and tameh. In other words, had half a kezait of meat that's pigul and half of a kezait of sacrificial parts that's pigul, and you ate one kezait, one would be liable. Or if it's half and it's notad, or half and half it's tameh, and one eats it, one would be liable. So they combine. It would make sense in the korban olah, because they are all of the same type. They're all, when you have in mind, that's going to be, I'm doing slaughtering for outside the time. Okay, so you're slaughtering outside the time. All of the meat and the sacrificial parts of a korban olah would be put on the altar. So you're having in mind that all of it is going to be put on the altar at the wrong time. So that's why all the prohibitions combine. So now let's analyze this. We understand why, if you offer outside the courtyard olah, and half of it's the meat and half of it is the sacrificial parts, since all of it is supposed to be burnt anyway, so that makes sense that it would combine. But when it comes to korban shelamim, where the meat of it is not going to be, or should not be offered on the inside mizbeach, therefore, if you burn it on the outside mizbeach, that doesn't count. And so just half a kezait of the sacrificial parts by itself will not join together with the meat of a shelamim. So that we understand. But when it comes to pigul, notad, and tameh, what is the reasoning why the half of meat and half of sacrificial parts of pigul, or notad, or tameh, how come they do not join together if he eats half and half? After all, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ilah that says anything that's pigul joins together. Anything that is notar joins together. So you see here that they do join together if it's half meat and half sacrificial parts. Kasha pigul pigul, kasha notar anotar. So now we have a difficulty of the pigul and pigul. On the one hand, in this Mishnah over here, it says that they do join together. However, and according to the Braita over here, it says that they join together only for korban olah, but not for a korban hatat. And so to notar, this Mishnah says they join together, and over there in this Braita says they don't join together. So which is it? Pigula kashya, kan bepigul, kan b'machshevet pigul. We can answer the contradiction between pigul and pigul by saying that in the Mishnah, when it says they join together, that's talking about when it's the actual pigul regarding eating it. If you have a half a kezait of pigul that's from the part of the flesh, and half a kezait of pigul that's part of the sacrificial parts, but it all became pigul because you had intention when you did shechita, you had intention of the whole animal you're going to consume after the time. The meat you're going to eat after, and the flesh you're going to burn after. You had in mind the whole thing you're going to consume after the time. So now the whole thing is pigul. Now you come to eat, and you eat half a kezait of the meat of the shelamim and half a kezait of the sacrificial parts of the shelamim. That joins together because it's all pigul. So that's no problem. That's the Mishnah. And in the Baraita, that's talking about if during the time that you're doing shechita and you're having a thought, and you think about, a half a kezait of the sacrificial parts I'm going to burn after the time, and half a kezait of the flesh I'm going to eat after the time. Those two will join together for the korban olah, because the korban olah doesn't matter. It's all being consumed. It's all being consumed on the mizbeach. So half a kezait of I'm going to burn, half a kezait of the flesh, and half a kezait of the sacrificial parts I'm also going to burn after the time. For korban olah, since it's all being burnt, it's all the same thing. It joins together, and pigul does kick in. However, if it's korban shelamim, and I have in mind half I'm going to of the sacrificial parts I'm going to burn after the time, and half a kezait of the flesh I'm going to eat after the time, though that does not join together, and therefore it does not become pigul. That's what the Baraita was talking about when it said that half and half do not join together for pigul. Notad anotad la kashya kan benotad kan besheni totru ad shelo nizra kadam. And there's no contradiction between the two statements about notad either. When the Mishnah says that for notad, all kinds of notad join together, that's regarding eating notad. If you have half a kezait of the flesh that was left over from a shelamim, and half a kezait of the sacrificial parts that were left over, and you eat that whole kezait, one is liable because they're both notad, so they join together. But when we say it does not join together, that is when they did not sprinkle the blood yet. The flesh does not become notad until you sprinkle the blood. The thing is, you can't sprinkle the blood if there's no flesh left. There has to be some flesh. If it's all gone somewhere, and there's nothing of the body of the animal left, then you can't sprinkle the blood anymore. But as long as you have a small piece, a kezait of the flesh, then you can still sprinkle the blood. So when it comes to a korban olah, even if you have half a kezait of flesh and half a kezait of sacrificial part left, and you didn't sprinkle the blood yet, go ahead, you can sprinkle the blood. That joins together. However, when it comes to shelamim, kadashim kalim, where it's not and anything except an olah, and you have only half a kezait of sacrificial parts and half a kezait of the meat, well, those do not join together because you need either a full kezait of sacrificial meat or a full kezait of flesh, because one is going to be all burnt, and the other is going to be eaten. So half and half doesn't all go for one purpose. If you have half that's going to be burnt and half that's going to be eaten, those don't join together because they're going to go to different purposes. That's what the Baraita meant when it said that only a half a kezait and half a kezait can join together for korban olah, where they're all going to be burnt, but not for any other korban. Umane Rabbi Yoshua, who is the author of this Baraita? It is Rabbi Yoshua who says, the Tanya, Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Kol Zevaḥim shebatorah shitayir behen kezait basar uchazait chaleb zorek et adam. Anytime you have a korban, that the most of the body of the animal is gone, but you have left a kezait of flesh or a kezait of chaleb. Chaleb is one of the sacrificial parts. Then, as long as you have a kezait of one or a full kezait of the other, then you can sprinkle the blood. If you have chasi zait basar v'chasi zait chaleb, eno zorek et adam. However, if you have only half a zait of flesh and half of a kezait of chaleb, then you cannot sprinkle the blood. U'ba'olah chasi zait basar v'chasi zait chaleb zorek et adam mipnei shekula kalil. The exception is the korban olah, where even if you have just a half a kezait of flesh and half a kezait of chaleb, you can still sprinkle the blood because those two can join together since they're all going to be burnt together. U'mincha afilu kula kayemet lo yizrok. A korban mincha, even if the entire korban mincha is there, you cannot sprinkle the blood. Now we wonder, what are you talking about? There is no blood for a korban mincha. Mincha, my abidita. What is mincha doing here? Why are you talking about sprinkling the blood of a korban mincha? Amara papa, minchat nesachim haba im hazevach. The papa says we're talking about a korban mincha, a meal offering that joins together to accompany an animal offering. So, if you have this animal offering, you did shechita and you have the blood. Now, the body of the animal is all gone. It got lost, it got destroyed, we don't have any of it. But we do have the korban mincha that we brought along with it. That's not good enough. The korban mincha does not count to be a substance of the korban so that you could sprinkle the blood. That's it. If you don't have a kazait of the meat itself, then you cannot sprinkle that blood. The next Mishnah teaches hakometz vehalebona v'haketoret uminchat kohanim uminchat kohen mashiach uminchat nesachim shehikri me'achat mehen kazait b'chutz hayav. We saw this list of items in the Braita above, but now this is in the Mishnah, continuation of the previous Mishnah, that if one takes a kezayit of the kometz of the meal offering for a regular mincha offering that a Yisrael brings, it's supposed to go on the mizbeach, and instead he puts it on the mizbeach outside, or a kezayit of levona, or a kezayit of ketoret, or mincha of kohanim or kohen mashiach, where the entire mincha has to be burnt, is supposed to be burnt on the regular mizbeach, and instead he burns it outside, or a korban mincha that comes along and accompanies a korban. So if any one of these, if someone burns a kezayit outside, one is liable. Rabbi Eliezer poter ad sheikri bet kulan. Rabbi Eliezer says no. He's only liable karet if he brings the entire amount of whatever the amount is, the entire kometz or the entire minchat kohanim, whatever is the entire amount that should be burnt on the regular mizbeach, he would be liable if he burns it outside the courtyard. That's Rabbi Eliezer. V'chulan sheikri bifnim v'shier mehen kazait v'krivo b'chutz chayav. Now Rabbi Eliezer will agree that let's say you have a minchat kohen where you have a whole lot of flour, and it was offered on the inside, regular mizbech, as is proper, except for a kezayit. And that last kezayit, someone takes it outside and burns it outside. Even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that he is liable. So although he said over here it has to be the entire thing is burnt, the point is that the entire thing is burnt. Yeah, if the entire thing is burnt outside, he's liable. But the point is that the last kezayit is the main thing. And so, if most of it was burnt properly on the inside, regular mizbeach in the courtyard, and then just the last kezayit was burnt outside, since that's the end of it, so everything was burnt, most of it properly, that's fine, but a kezayit improperly, so chayav karet, also according to the Eliezer. V'chulan shechasru kol shehu v'kribo b'chutz patur. Now, there's a law regarding korban mincha in general that in order for it to be a proper korban mincha in the courtyard on the mizbeach, the entire thing has to exist. If you have a certain portion that you're supposed to burn, and then part of it gets lost before you burn it, so even if you have a kezayit left to burn, but it's no good because part of it is burnt, part of it is lost. So kushash kolan shehasru, and then you will not fulfill. It's not a valid korban if part of it is lost before the haktara, before you burn it. Therefore, if part of it is lost first, and then one burns the rest of it outside, he is exempt, since if you did it properly, you would not fulfill the mitzvah, the korban would be invalid. Therefore, if you do it outside, it would be since it would be invalid. If you do it outside, one would be patur. Hamakrib kodashim ve'emurin b'chutz chayav. If one offers sacrificial meat and regular meat, the regular meat of a sacrifice and the sacrificial parts together outside, one is liable for the sacrificial parts, not for the part that you're supposed to eat. The part you're supposed to eat, you're not supposed to burn anyway. And so that part of it, you are not liable. But the point is that if they're mixed together, stuck together, then one is liable for the emurin. Teno Rabbanan, hamaktir kazayit b'chutz chayav, chasi peras bifnim patur. Now there's a braita that's focusing on the ketoret. The ketoret, you're supposed to bring a peras, which is half of a maneh. A peras means a half, a portion of a maneh, a half in the morning and a half in the afternoon. That's the full amount, is a peras. Now, let's say someone brings a kezayit of ketoret outside, even though kezayit is less than a peras. Nevertheless, one is liable, and that's exactly what is said in the Tanakama. Here, the ketoret is one of them. If you bring a kezait, even though that's not the full amount, one will be liable. And then it says something that we have to figure out what it means. If you bring half a peras is still more than a kezait. If one brings half a peras inside, one is patur. Well, why would you think you'd be chayav if you brought it inside? So we have to figure this out. Kasal kadatin, my patur zar. So maybe when it says patur, it's talking about a non-kohen. If a non-kohen would bring a full pedas, that's a full amount, then he'd be liable. Non-kohen, you can't bring ketoret. But since it was only half a pedas, less than a shiur, so therefore he's patur. Maybe that's what it means. But that doesn't make sense. Amai, haktarahi. Doesn't make sense because that is an act of burning. After all, you said in the Resha that if you burn a kezayit of ketoret outside, one is liable. Therefore, even a kezayit is considered an official act of burning ketoret, and therefore it should be sufficient if a non-kohen does it inside that even a kezayit should be liable. So why does it say half a peras is not liable? Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Bar Abba, Amar Rav, by patur sibur. So Rav explains, no, we're talking about a kohen who's doing it, a proper kohen. And patur means not patur from liability, that he exempts the community. It exempts their obligation to bring ketoret. Although, if done properly, you're supposed to bring a peras, and he didn't. He only brought half a peras. Okay, he brought half a peras. They fulfilled their obligation for bringing ketoret. That's what it means. Amar Rabbi Zera, ikasheli hakasheli. Had Amar Rav Allah. Rabbi Zera, who's the one that just cited the statement of Rav, now says, if I have a question, I actually have a question about what Rav said about this halacha. Rav mentioned that Beha afilu Rabbi Eliezer modeh, with regard to this halacha, that if someone kohen inside the temple courtyard in the regular mizbeach, if he gives half a peras, then it's okay. That's how Rav explained this baraita, chasi peras bifnim patur. And then Rav said that Rabbi Eliezer would agree to that. But that can't be. Taha Rabbi Eliezer lav haktarahi kamar, because Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah said that you have to, in order to be liable outside of the courtyard, you have to give the whole amount. That must be because he thinks that also inside, in order to fulfill your obligation, you have to give the whole amount. So it can't be that Rabbi Eliezer would agree that if you give half a peras, if you burn half a peras, then you fulfill the obligation for ketoret. Amar Rabba, Baktara dehechal kula ama la pelige. And so now Rabbi explains, indeed, when it comes to the ketoret that's placed in the hechal, that is on the golden mizbeach, that's most ketoret all year long, that's where the ketoret is placed. Everybody agrees, even Rabbi Eliezer agrees, that a half of a peras is okay. Ki pelige b'haktara difnim. Rather, the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages is regarding the ketoret that's done in Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur. Temor sabar meloch hafnav davka. Rabbi Eliezer, when he says you need the whole amount, he's learning it from here, that on Yom Kippur, since it says he has to fill his hands full, so that means it precisely has to be that full amount. Whereas the other sages, more sabar, meluchov nav lav davka, even though Torah says it has to be that how much his hands are full, it's not precise. It means some amount, even less than that is still okay. So that's where the machloket is. Amar le Abaye, v'haki ketiba chuka b'haktarab difnim hu dichtib. Abaye says, no, that doesn't make sense because the word chuka is mentioned regarding Yom Kippur, where the ketoret is brought in the Kodesh Kodashim, and the word chuka means precise. Ela amar Abaye b'haktara bifnim kula ama la pelige. Rather, Abaye says when it comes to the amount that you need to offer in the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur, everybody agrees that is 2 handfuls, as the pasuk says, chukah. So you can't go less than that. That's totally in agreement. In addition, everybody is going to agree regarding the amount that you need in the hechal for the daily ketoret offering to fulfill that. You only need a kezayit. That was the braita and Rav's explanation of the braita, and Rav said that Rabbi Eliezer agrees to that. You only need a kezayit for the hechal. We're going to call that the outside. It's not outside, it's still in the hechal, but it's outside the Kodesh Kodashim. That also everybody agrees. Furthermore, everyone's going to agree that if you bring the daily ketoret outside of the courtyard, then one is liable even just for a kezayit, since that's the amount that you need to fulfill your obligation when you put it on the golden altar. So too, that's the amount that you will be liable for if you burn it outside. So far, that's all in agreement. So what do they disagree about? What they disagree about is if you bring the Yom Kippur Ketoret that you're supposed to bring in the Kodesh Kodashim. And that has to be a handful, 2 handfuls. You can't do less than that. But if you bring that outside, then how much would you be liable for? The sages say, we say that the same amount that you would be liable for the outside, meaning for the regular ketoret, if you burnt it outside of the courtyard, would be only kezayit. So we learn panim, we learn the Yom Kippur ketoret. If you burn it outside, we'll learn from the regular ketoret that you bring daily. So this means panim michutz, that the panim is the Yom Kippur ketoret. We will learn from the law of the regular ketoret that you bring all the time. And the regular ketoret is kezayit. If you burn that much, you're liable outside. So too, the Yom Kippur one. So we learn it from the outside. Eliezer says, no, we do not derive the inside amount from the outside one. Rather, that just like in order to fulfill your obligation on Yom Kippur, inside you need a full 2 handfuls. So too, in order to be liable when you burn the Yom Kippur Ketoret outside of the courtyard totally, you also need a full amount. That's where the machloket is. Amar Rava, hashta chutz michutz layalfei Rabbanan, panim michutz mibae. Rava says this doesn't make sense. The rabbis, in a source that we're going to see in a second, they do not learn even an outside law from another outside law. So you think that they're going to learn an inside law from an outside law? Even outside to outside they don't do. So all the more so, they're not going to learn the amount that you have to burn regarding the Yom Kippur Ketoret. They're going to learn that from the amount from the outside Ketoret that you bring in the Hechal. Doesn't make sense. Now, where do we see that they don't even learn an outside law from an outside law? The Tanya, Yachol ha'ma'aleh pachot mikazait kometz u'pachot mikazait emurin v'amenasech pachot misheloshet lugin yain pachot misheloshet lugin mayim yeheh chayav Talmud omar la'asot al ha'shalem chayav ve'no chayav al ha'chaser. It's from this braita that says, you might think that if someone offers less than a kezayit of the kometz, the handful of flour, or less than the kezayit of sacrificial parts, all this out on the outside of the courtyard, or if someone pours less than 3 lugin of wine, or less than 3 lugin of water, would he be liable? That's why it says la'asot, to sacrifice it, only if it's a full amount and not if it's lacking. Now, notice these liquids. Pachot mishloshet lugin, tbiu kama zetim, ve'la yalfin Rabbanan chutz michutz. 3 lugin has many zetim in it. That's much more than a zayit. And yet, the rabbis are not going to learn the law of liability for outside to outside, meaning that they're not going to learn the amount of oil that you need to be able to be liable for from the amount of ketoret that you would have to bring on the golden mizbeach, because that's only a kezayit. And here they don't say, oh, well, for ketoret you only need a kezayit, so for oil also you should only need a kezayit. They don't say that. So if in this case they don't even learn an outer law from an outer law, certainly they're not going to learn a law about the inner ketoret from what you need for the outer ketoret. And therefore Rava is going to propose his own solution, but we'll get to that tomorrow because that's going to have its own discussion. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.